Fred, I have an important question. From your research, how widely are the principles and the important work that you've done, how widely has that translated into farming, let's say, as a percentage of farms or ranches across the states? Is this widely known and understood and practiced, or is it still more of a boutique or unique situation?
Excellent question, Ian. And I would say so we did 25 years worth of research, basically from the mid 70s until about the year 2000, to just to try to understand. And you made the point principles, and that's what we were thinking. If we can focus on principles and processes, that's the key thing. Because the practices all become culturally inflected, right? They become unique to the place. Everything becomes unique to a particular place, but the principles and processes are what transcend time and space, right? So
Yeah.
we try to focus on those. And then I was diagnosed with cancer in 99. And when I came back from having a resection of my lower colon, I was sitting with two colleagues, and we said, if we're going to get this information out more broadly to people, and the three of us all had experience working on ranches. We had spent a lot of time, and so we understood that world, and we understood how what we were doing related to that world. And so we thought we need to try to get this information out. And there was a program at the USDA at that time. Unfortunately, we were able to get a large grant, the largest one we ever got, $4.5 million, to continue the research, but to do outreach. And so we started just creating fact sheets, creating videos, doing talks all around the country, and eventually all around the world, train the trainers kind of programs. And for a 10-year period then, from about 2000 to 2010, we had this tremendous outreach program. We had an advisory board of 45 people early on, the most innovative people we could find, because we thought those are the ones that are going to help to get the ideas out, and they're going to help us to grow the ideas. And so our first meeting in 2000, I spent 2 days just overviewing all the work that we'd been doing, and boy, they were just captivated. They were ready to go. How can we help you guys? What can we do? And so for the next decade, we all worked together. I used to say we're all students learning from one another. And the Behave program, the idea was to think about how we can do practices that benefit people ecologically, economically, and socially. And so everything that we did was with that in mind. And I think a lot about the economics, because as ranchers say, there's never been much money in farming and ranching. That's a tough deal. And so how can you cut costs? How can you do that? And there were so many practical kinds of things that we were able to do working with the ranchers and farmers and with their livestock and their landscapes to cut costs, to reduce the costs of operation. And much of it was thinking about how do we create animals that are locally adapting and co-evolving with their landscapes, kind of create wildlife creatures, use that idea of how do wildlife make their living on these landscapes, and how can we do that, and what are the kind of adaptations that take place in terms of form, function, and behavior that allow those animals to live and thrive within those environments. So that, I know that's not getting into particulars about things that we were doing, but that was the idea. And over again, we were working with people across the US and eventually around the world to think about how do we do that in ways that blend ecology, economics, and social kinds of facets of that, including the welfare of the animals and so forth.
So I read one of your lectures. You spoke about where there's a huge input from fossil fuels to produce food for animals where they're not eating off the high rangeland, but they're rather on the down below where they're just having monocultures, but you were training the animals to go up high and eat the plants up there, which were less, I guess, nutrient dense, but more varied. And this was the way you actually cut down on the cost. And you, as you said, you were bringing the animals back to a more wild or more related to their evolutionary background, which enabled them to produce actually more produce from the land with less input. Was that a true summary of what you were doing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely the case. Over and over again, that's what we were doing. Thinking about one for ranchers in the U.S., I would say, and probably many parts of the world, but here in the U.S. and in the Western U.S. where we were working, feeding hay during the winter time is the most expensive thing that they do, because you have to irrigate, which is expensive, cut, bale, haul hay, and then feed it in the winter. So when people were looking at where are our expenses, they were saying that's where they are. And so we were thinking about, are there ways, and this very much depended on the local place and what the people were doing, but are there ways that we can either eliminate, if we can eliminate feeding of hay during the wintertime, can we do that? Or can we at least minimize the feeding of hay? And so we were working. Let me give you an example. There was a place that we were working in Wyoming, Deseret Land and Livestock, and they were really interested in cutting costs. They had a lot of sagebrush on those landscapes, a lot of sagebrush, and sagebrush is a shrub. It's an aromatic shrub, very high in terpenes, high in a diverse mix of different kinds of terpenes. It gives it that wonderful odor, same as with conifers, the rich mixtures of terpenes. But it was typically, it's been viewed as a really bad plant. And so people have spent lots of money trying to get rid of it with herbicides, with burning, with a variety of different ways. And what we were saying was, look, we should think about this as a forage to use in the late fall and the winter time. And maybe what you can do to help. So if you imagine these landscapes dominated by sagebrush, not a lot of understory grasses and forbs, and you're feeding hay. And so we were saying, look, maybe what we can do is start to retrain these cattle herds, sheep as well, cattle and sheep herds, to utilize the sage, and we can supplement them with a little bit of that hay that you've been feeding. Let's use that as a supplement. Why that? We were doing studies to show that when animals are eating diets that are very high in compounds like terpenes, they've got to eliminate those. They've got eliminate them from detoxify and eliminate them from the body. Those are expensive in terms of nutrients. It takes nutrients to do that. If we showed that if we supplemented animals with a little bit of protein and energy kind of food, hay, for instance, we could double their intake of sagebrush with a little bit of supplement, because it was enabling them to enhance detoxification. We're working with toxicologists to show those kinds of things. So here became a very practical approach. I remember one rancher in Oregon who was participating in the Behave program, had to twist his arm a little bit he was coming each year to the advisory board meetings, twist his arm to give a talk. He said, I'm embarrassed to get up in front of a group. I said, you need to tell your story. And he was just telling about learning about this as an approach and saying he started to do that with his cattle. And he said, now I'm just sick over all the money I spent trying to get rid of sagebrush, because now I view it as a forage resource. And if you think about what's happening, I'll tell you one other thing. Sagebrush doesn't tolerate browsing very well. So if you're having animals utilizing that as a forage resource during the winter time, you're decreasing the abundance of sagebrush. You're not getting rid of it entirely. You're decreasing its abundance. What's happening to the grasses and forbs that are in very low abundance? They're increasing tremendously in the understory. So you're changing the whole system ecologically, economically, socially. And that's just one of many examples of the kinds of things we were doing to help cut costs, but doing it in ways that were thinking about the whole system ecologically. You know, one of the challenges we had, this was with sheep, the whole other place, but the same ideas. We were using sheep to create mosaics across those landscapes by browsing sagebrush during the late fall and winter time to create more habitat. What was amazing was that there was so much, they became these huge islands of attraction. All the wildlife creatures were coming into those places to forage because of the diversity. And not only the diversity of plants, but the insect life that had increased in those places. So it was just a very, very exciting kind of work, and work where you're just trying to think creatively about principles and processes from a plant standpoint, jumping around on you. But we knew, we had studied sagebrush a lot, and we knew that during the springtime, sagebrush greatly increases concentrations of terpenes in the leaves and stems. They stay very high during the summer and into the fall. Once you get into late fall and winter, terpene concentrations decline. So we were thinking about plants and plant behavior as much as we were thinking about animals and animals behavior, and then how do we blend those things so that we can get a match. And I've mentioned it, but I'll just say it again. Sagebrush becomes then viewed as a valuable plant species as part of your plant diversity. You don't want to absolutely eliminate it at very costly kinds of ways with herbicides and so forth.
So what you're talking about here, Fred, is really we have to work as scientists now, not to combat nature, but to discover how to work with it to enhance our lives. Because up until now, we are using herbicides, we're using fungicides, we're using all these things, all these toxins, which are huge cost to try and eliminate what we see as poisons. And yet you're showing that what we should be doing is working out how to work with them and to utilize them and using natural systems. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I'm just hoping that your work is now going to be translated on a much wider scale. And I presume, would it be true to say that a lot of your work is now being used by regenerative farmers?
The demand is incredible, Ian. The demand is incredible. I've cut back on travels, getting older, and it's tired. I love people. I'll say that. You know, you can tell. I love people. I love interacting. I love going to conferences, but it is tiring. And my wife hates me to go, so I'm cutting back on that. But there's just tremendous, tremendous interest. I could be gone all the time here nationally and internationally as well. You know, I think the point you're making and that of working with nature, I think of that a lot anymore. And that means you have to develop a relationship, right? You have to be interested in natural systems. You have to, and I'm not criticizing if people aren't, but I think of some of the ranchers and farmers we worked with, the ones who really do well are the ones that just in their heart, they're interested. They just love the natural world, and they want to think about how does that world work, and so forth. And I think I don't want to digress this too far, but this book here, the Tao Te Ching, and Lao Tzu, there's a part in there. He says, less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The purest and most effective form of action. The game plays the game. The poem writes the poem. We can't tell the dance from the dancer. We merge seamlessly with the natural world, right? And I don't think that's just words, but I think it takes some, what do we say? It takes some working on the relationship, right? We need to work on the relationship in order to do that. It's not something that
that's absolutely right. You see, my belief is that politicians are not going to save this planet. with all their rules and laws about carbon dioxide and that. It's our farmers who love the land is going to save us, because they feed us and they look after the land, and they are going to, hopefully, if there's enough people take notice of your work, that this will become widespread, and that regenerative farming, which actually traps carbon in the soil and makes the whole planet much healthier for people, for animals, and so on. This is where we have to end up. And one of the things that really worries me is this idea that we can create food by taking animal cells and then feeding them rubbish and turning it into food for humans. And that is so against what our bodies are designed to use, as I understand it.
Oh, again, so many thoughts racing through my mind, Ian, when you say what you say, and I simply couldn't agree more with every point that you just made there. I'm thinking of some work that I'm a cheerleader nowadays for a lot of young researchers. Help write proposals, help write review papers, and then they're taking off with it. But the fake foods that we make, and for instance, plant-based meats that we make, and that we argue that's similar. We did some work, metabolomics analyses, looking at two different kinds of plant-based meats, and then we compared that with meat that was coming from a livestock producer, Glenn Elzinga, I'll mention his name, in Idaho, that just has a fabulous operation, not only enhancing the health of the landscapes, the plant diversity and so forth, but the health of his animals, because they're eating diverse arrays of plants, and then the quality of the meat. And so we compared these plant-based meats with meat from Glen Elzinga. And if you look at the labels and just what's on the labels, you would say, oh yeah, they're similar. But when you look at the metabolomics and when you look at the phytochemical and biochemical richness of that meat, there's no comparison whatsoever. It's black and white advantages to Glen, and we know to the meat that Glen's produced that that meat is higher in antioxidants, anti-inflammatory kinds of compounds, immunomodulatory kinds of compounds, and Stefan Van Vliet is one of the people I've been a cheerleader for, and he's just doing phenomenal kind of work, metabolomics work. With wild and domestic animals, everything from chickens to pigs to livestock, and then looking at how diet is influencing the phytochemical and biochemical characteristics of the meat and fat, and then looking at he has a PhD student now who's doing some wonderful trials with humans, looking at what is the influence of eating diets like that. You mentioned Will Harris earlier, and Will Harris Farm. So the fruits and vegetables and the meat are coming from Will Harris Farm. The animals eating diverse. If you eat that kind of a diet versus a more conventional diet, what's the difference in terms of anatomy, physiology, health of the human being? It's wonderful to see that kind of work. And I've had people say, well, meat is meat, but I don't buy that. There are so many compounds that get into the meat of animals that are eating diverse diets. And when you get into some of that very controversial literature, is meat good for you or not? And you can find whatever you want on that, right? I mean, we know that. And I just put a slide together. It shows two recent studies. One saying, meat causes diabetes. The other saying from clinical epidemiological studies. The other from clinical trials saying, no, there's no evidence for that. But a key point is that some of the alleged adverse effects of meat would be countered when animals are eating these phytochemically rich diets, because compounds that get into the meat counter the influence of some of the compounds. I know that's vague. I don't want to get into the weeds on all
No, absolutely right. We are what the animals that we eat.
That's right. We are what we eat, eats. It's absolute, and that would be the same for our dogs and cats as well, right?
Absolutely. One of your papers, I think, mentioned analyzing muscle tissue from humans. I think it was, well, no, maybe it was from animals, but um, I guarantee that if we took raw-fed animals that were on a meat and plant-based diet from a diverse range of foods and looked at the muscle tissue there and compared it to the muscle tissue of animals eating fake industrial food, there would be a world of difference.
Absolutely the case, Ian, and that's certainly what we're finding. And the work that Stefan's doing, you know what, I'm mentioning this work. If any of the viewers uh, want to get into the weeds on that, we've published several papers on that in the best journals in Nature, you know, and nature journals. So we've got work on bison, we've got work on cattle. There's a paper just coming out on cattle in one of the nature journals. So you don't have to just take my word as I'm saying this stuff, say, well, this is some guy that's really excited about this stuff. That I wouldn't be saying it if there weren't evidence on that. And also review papers that we've written. We've written 3 different major reviews, and then many of the scientific paper I mentioned comparing plant-based meats with meat from animals on diverse diets. That was published in one of the nature journals as well. So, if readers want support material, Rob, on any of this, I'm happy to provide that so people can look at that and say, and I'll say in our defense too, we've tried very hard to walk a middle line on this stuff, to not, when it comes to diets for humans, which we get into on some of this, we've not tried to say, well, all you should eat is meat or all you should eat is plants. We've tried to point out, there are things that meat provides in nutrients and really abundance, and there are also things that plants provide. And then also, to make the point that when animals are eating diverse diets, their meat is quite different from animals that are coming through a feedlot. Their health is different and their meat is different. And that, like I was saying, when Stefan looks in, he's human nutritionist who's worked on humans. He said, when I look at muscle tissue from animals that are coming from feedlots, looks like a human in early stages of metabolic syndrome. When I look at the muscle tissue from animals out there foraging on diverse diets, it looks like a healthy animal. And you just think diet and lifestyle, ability to roam and so forth.
Hey, Fred,
Well,
go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, I think your work translates across the entire spectrum, from farm animals to domestic animals to humans. It's applicable right there. And I just hope that more notice can be taken of the work that you have done, because it's a lifetime of brilliant work. And I want to say well done for the work you have done to demonstrate all of that. What do you think, Rob?
Oh, it's overwhelming. It's, one of the joys of what I get to do now is talk to folks like you, work with Dr. Billinghurst, and you both think very differently than I do. And I'm much more of a layman mind and try to create that bridge between what's in your brains and what's in the average consumer mind who doesn't have a lot of time to research. So what I'm wondering here, Fred, is in our world, Dr. Billinghurst and I, we come across more and more and more nutritionists, so-called, they could be board certified or self-studied or self-certified nutritionists who are focused on nutrients as opposed to food and nutrition. And I'm sure you probably come across the same thing in your world. What is your view of this, proliferation and this, it's getting worse, I think, than getting better. I feel like while there's much more of an awareness of regenerative farming, really healthy food, what it means, I'm very heartened by that. There is definitely more of an increase to make nutrition proprietary and make it harder to understand and achieve. And so therefore you must buy this thing or these things, this shake, this prepared meat or whatever, and this is going to deliver all you need. And you don't understand nutrition, just buy this thing. Tell us what your feeling is about that. Nutritionists versus food nutrition.
I'm amazed how much I'm on the same page as you guys. I have to tell you, before we did this interview, I was wondering, what are they going to be wanting to talk about? What are they going to want to talk? And I'm old now, so I'll talk about whatever person I'll say if I don't know. But, to me, one of the most interesting and revelatory papers I read when I was writing Nourishment, and this came out of the human literature, was titled "Food, Not Nutrient is the Basic Unit in Nutrition." Oh. Food, not nutrient, is the basic unit in nutrition. And they simply went through and made the point. And they said, okay, there are cases where specific nutrients are very important and deficiencies can cause issues. And so they acknowledged that. But they said, for the most part, what you miss with this nutrient approach is the complexity, the tremendous complexity of all the nutrient in meat. What, 45,000 different compounds? You're never going to study that from a reductionist standpoint. And yet, when you think of the body, and this is where I think of the wisdom of the body, and I think how that never gets talked about, how that never is something, but it's built in. There is a wisdom to the body that knows what it needs, but it's been so hijacked from a human standpoint, and as you guys are talking from the standpoint of pets and pet food, that it's a mess. But there's this wisdom of the body that knows what it needs, and if it's given suitable choices and suitable experiences starting in utero and early in life, and the ability to learn and these transgenerational linkages, that makes the animals so a part of the landscapes they come from. And I'm just not a fan of the reductionist nutrient approach. I think this idea of food and wholesome foods, as you've been saying, wholesome foods is really the route to health, and then to trust in the wisdom of the body. Offer suitable choices, let individuals figure out what it is they need. We did a study with cattle, sheep to cattle once. I'm thinking about that right now. It's come into my mind. And we had one group of cattle that were being finished as nutritionists would, right? And again, I'm not trying to denigrate there. The nutritionist we were working with was very holistic in his views, and he understood what we were trying to do. So he said, okay, formulate a total mixed ration for this group of animals, but this other group, we're going to just feed them the 5 ingredients that you put into that total mixed ration. You should have seen the difference during that 2-month feeding trial to the end. So what did we find? It surprised us. One was that the animals given a choice ate less food than the animals fed the total mixed ration. They ate less food. They finished when we slaughtered them, they graded at the same grade as the animals that were fed the feedlot ration, but it cost way less to finish them. Why? Because they were eating less food. When we look at protein to energy ratios, as just one measure, for instance, for the animals on the total mixed ration, that's set, right? That's fixed as a function of they don't have any choice. This is what it is. When we looked at the individual animals, they were all over the place. Some were higher than the average, some were lower than the average. No animal was the average. When we looked also at what those animals did from day to day, no 2 animals ever selected the same combination of foods. No individual ever selected the same food from day to day, but each one of those individuals selected a diet that met its needs and did it in a way that was less costly. When I say what I just said now, I'm thinking of Clara Davis, a lady named Clara Davis that published papers on humans back at the turn of the last century. And what Clara did, she had, if I'm recalling correctly, 15 infants given up for adoption in an orphanage. And for 6 years, they fed those infants wholesome foods available in the market. And there were 34 different foods available seasonally. And they let each child self-select their own diet. They had a pediatrician that was on that study. He said he'd never seen a healthier set of children in his life. Though when she wrote about it, she said no 2 children ever selected the same foods. No child ever selected the same food from day to day, but they all selected a diet that met their needs. That's exactly what I didn't know of her work when we were publishing our work on cattle. And when I read it, it's like, whoa, you would think we plagiarized her and we didn't have a clue. We were writing the same words to describe what we were seeing with the cattle in one case, she with the children in her case, which fits back in with what you're saying about the generalizability, I think, of the principles and the processes related to food selection of different creatures.
Yeah.
As long as that food is what they've been eating or evolved to eat over millions of years, because that's what their genome expects. Would you think that would be a true statement?
Absolutely the case, and that's where whether it's a cow or a human, as my medical doctor friend would say, or a cat or a dog, to formulate these very high grain rations, we didn't do that, right? And it leads to the same kinds of outputs as you were saying, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, all kinds of issues that happen when you put animals on diets that they were never designed to to primarily live on, right? When I think about the dog foods that we were looking at when we were thinking of getting a Henry and stuff, and it's like, wow, this you could feed that to a part of a feedlot ration to a cow or something, or
Surprise.
I guess make it into biscuits and feed it to a human, or make it into pancakes or what, I don't know what, but it's the same idea. And I couldn't agree more. Thinking evolutionarily, as you said, well, what have these animals fed on historically, and how do we create wholesome foods for the diets for them? Absolutely the case. I just couldn't agree more. And I hope, Rob, did that get to your question of this idea? I think the single nutrient focus is not good. We've extracted the diet from the culture, the diet from the culture, the nutrient from the food, and so on and so forth, and we end up totally confused, right? It becomes totally confusing, and then you think, from a human standpoint, about all the advice we get and how that advice changes constantly, and then you think about, well, what did we eat historically? And I know it wasn't uniform. Paul Rosen was another one who was very influential. Psychology of Eating and Drinking. Did so many wonderful studies of humans. And I remember one of his chapters in a book just talking about how different human diets were around the globe. As you go, it was reflecting the different kinds of foods available in the diet and the fact that we're omnivorous. And one could think that too, in terms of perhaps, and you can qualify, you say, if in terms of, for instance, a coyote or something like that in different parts of the world, in the Arctic maybe, versus in as you move south into other latitudes, different things are going to be available, and they're opportunistic in what they eat. But certainly they're going to be wholesome foods that are an important part of their diet and have been over many long years, huh?
Well, Fred, you
Absolutely.
you did answer my question, and I want to just take it a step further, because you said you didn't want to, offend or disparage anybody in the nutrition field, and you work with that really wise, holistic nutritionist gentleman. I feel the same. I mean, there's really no point in disparaging or, I'm not interested in people's motives. What I'm more interested in is the fruits of their labor. And as they go through their studies and their life, are they self-aware? Are they constantly asking questions? Are they constantly curious? And if they're not, I'm not interested in talking to them or working with them. If they're just blind to one lane, that just doesn't interest me. And I'm just curious about what your feeling is, because going back to what Dr. Billinghurst and I see a lot is people locked into a paradigm, and they've got a stranglehold on it and they won't let go. And I just want to know, like, what is it about people in academia and in science, some people, that have got them so myopically focused, so, narrowly focused on something and resistant to learning and becoming having a wider view of anything that they're studying. Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I won't say names right now, but I'm just thinking of
Go ahead.
of
No.
different groups that I know about. And now I'm thinking from the human standpoint because it's on my mind. I'm going to be giving a talk to some medical students, and so I'm putting together a talk, and I'm looking at some of that literature. But different groups become very entrenched, and I think you build your reputation on a particular way of thinking. And you mentioned Karl Popper early on, Ian, right? I mean, if we were to take that seriously and think in terms of multiple working hypotheses rather than our pet hypothesis, right? That's easier said than done, though. But it's so easy to become entrenched. And then, as John Galbraith said, faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to do so, most people get busy on the proof, right? I mean, it's human nature, and I think how do we try to guard that? And then, the group I'm thinking of from a human standpoint, they're a very, very influential group. So they put something out like this 2024 paper, and that's picked up by so many different groups. And then they said, well, eating red meat's clearly bad for you. Well, not really, because the kind of study they did does not prove that. And the randomized clinical trials actually go opposite of that sort of thing. So it's no wonder there's so much confusion, huh? And then you try to think, well, how do you try to to be open in the way that you present ideas, and to try to have some rationales and support for what you do. It can sure be a challenge. I marvel sometimes thinking about all of that stuff, and then yeah, it's such a good point that you're making, Rob, on all of that. It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. But I think too. So how do you influence people? I'm going to tell you a story. A year ago in July, over the 4th of July, it's a holiday here in the States. We decided to have a family reunion for my 4 sisters and their spouses and their kids, and we ended up with about 20 people here for 4 or 5 days. We were so tired we couldn't even talk by the end of it, and we thought, but it was wonderful. Where we live here in Innis, it's just beautiful mountains and rivers, and we're able to float them down rivers, take them and show them diverse rangelands and all the beautiful plants. Not that they care about all the diverse, but they could look at all the beautiful wildflowers. But on July 4th, we had some steaks. We get our meat from Francois Comunetti and his wife, Kate, who live here in Montana, and we do that deliberately to try to help them. They raise their animals on diverse mixtures of foods. They finish them on those foods, and their meat is just incredible flavor. So we cook these steaks, and Sue always wants to cook. It's like, this is enough steaks for an army, but she said, well, you got to have enough. We've got to have enough. There's no way they're going to eat all these steaks. Well, there wasn't one scrap of meat left. And they started to eat those, and they said, this is the most delicious meat. Where did you get it? See, I didn't say a word. I wasn't trying to promote any of this that we're talking about.
Yeah.
They were just saying, they said, this is delicious. We love it. They're coming back for seconds, ones that don't even eat too much meat. And it struck me then, that's the way to get people's attention. They have to have the experience, right? And then I didn't wear it out. I didn't talk long like we're talking. I just said, the reason this meat is so flavorful, it's because these animals were eating this diverse mixture of plants. And not only is that diverse mixture better for their health, now you're experiencing that flavor is linked through that phytochemical and biochemical richness to health, and your body is knowing that, and it's saying, give me more of this, eat that stuff. So it lets you realize, how do you get people to think and I think it's the experience, huh? I mean, we wrote a jillion papers, and that's not going to move anyone. I mean, it would get scientists, and maybe now if we need to support some of what we're saying, we can say, okay, we did do studies on this. But how do you get people to actually experience these things? I think then you can say, and then you can start, and I didn't even start to touch on this, but there's a wisdom of your body. There's feedback from these cells and organ systems, including the microbiome, but not only the gut biome, it's all these organ systems.
Yep.
They're voting, huh? You mentioned earlier, Ian, that you don't like the politicians and top down. I've always been a bottom up. I don't like top down either. I think if you want energy, you should go from the grassroots up. And that's what those cells are doing. They're voting, through nerves like the vagus nerves, through hormones, through neurotransmitters, peptides. They're saying, this works for me. So let's have some of that. And this other stuff that's not real food. And we know that when we go to the store and you look at these vegetables that look beautiful and you taste them and there's no flavor whatsoever, and little kids can't stand to eat them, that's because there's nothing there, right? In terms of the phytochemical richness. And the body knows that. Don't waste my time with this thing,
Yep. That's right.
Thank you for those wonderful words of wisdom, because it's absolutely true, Fred. Just lovely to hear you talk.
Well, it's lovely to be able to, you can tell I'm passionate about this. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, and I hope it's, trying to keep the mind open, as we say. I always think that. And when I give talks, I like to say, look, this is food for thought. This is food for you to think about. Don't take it as dogma or gospel, because then you lock in, right? And I'm passionate about this, so that can tend to make people believe it, right? But try to keep the mind open. Try to keep the mind open all the time. But I'm very passionate about all of this, obviously. To be able to talk with you guys about it, and I'm thinking, Ian and Rob, there's a lady named Karen Becker. You guys know Karen Becker, right?
Yes, we do. Yes.
I think she's talked about it. I did a podcast with her a long time ago. She read Nourishment, and she said, this is what we need to do. She held up that book and she said, this is a model for the kind of work that we need to do with all these other creatures too. This can be a model for the kind of research we can do. And she's gone on to have New York Times best-selling book and stuff. Occasionally I get back with Karen, but I think I heard about some of what you guys are doing in the conversation with Karen. It's just too familiar to me, and but I hadn't put that together till we're together now, and it's coming back to me. But that would have been a natural place that she would have talked about what you guys are doing. Absolutely.